platform was deserted. A row of pillars with electronic boards, empty benches, bright, colorless lighting, and beyond them, the frosty Kazan night. A thin layer of snow lay beneath their feet, and the silence rang. This strange, magical moment was worth leaving the station 15 minutes before the train's arrival. Ilya slung his bag over his shoulder and walked along the platform. The frost nipped at his cheeks, and he buried his face deeper in his scarf, his hands in his pockets. The scarf, by the way, was wonderful, warm, long, made of blue, brown, and white yarn. Elisa had knitted it. Of course, it was warmer inside the building. Thankfully, it had finally been restored, with seating and signs in all languages stuffed inside. But now, there were so many people crammed in there that finding somewhere private to sit and read a book was out of the question. The information boards weren't working either. You couldn't plug your headphones in. You had to listen constantly. So, as soon as they announced the track where train 099 was arriving, Ilya rushed out. Little by little, people began to appear on the platform. Everyone had these large suitcases on wheels, but Ilya had just one bag, and it only contained Elisa's books. He often traveled to see her light, but this time he hadn't even brought a change of underwear, even though the bag had been packed for months. The train, it crawled along noisily. The windows weren't lit. People began to bustle about, looking for their carriages. Ilya, too, reached for his number 9. He was quite cold. Even his gloved hands were numb. They had to shift around for another 10 minutes at the carriage until the lights came on and the conductors let them in. Ilya took off his gloves and pulled out his passport. He glanced at his ticket for some reason, even though he already remembered. Car 9, seat 45. A side berth, and a lower one at that. The conductor returned his documents, and Ilya finally entered the warmth. He usually took the top berth, so he could quickly climb up there with a book and headphones. He liked the reserved seats, but he disliked the people in them, especially the talkative ones. Stopping every now and then, waiting to be led through, the young man walked to the middle of the car, shoved his bag under the table, and plopped down next to him. There was no one there yet. With luck, there wouldn't be. Yes, Ilya definitely loved trains, always had, although he only rode for the first time when he was 12 or 13. His grandfather, a man he'd barely met, had died. Ilya had seen him once, and even then only in a dream. And he didn't look like his photographs. It seemed sad, but his father took Ilya to a wake in a village near Astrakhan, where his grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins, and second cousins were all there. A crowd of people who frightened and yet captivated him with their unexpected love for him. But most importantly, he and his father spent 2 days traveling on a train in a compartment car. And it was an amazing adventure for the boy. No brothers or sisters, just him and his dad. Ilya on the top bunk, his father below, and the neighbor across the way. A very beautiful girl. Of course, there were a lot of people in the car, but that also seemed interesting. Well, maybe going to the toilet was a bit awkward. The lights in the car were dim, and passengers floated and bustled in the thick, yellowish gloom. The train shuddered. Ilya hung his jacket on the hook, covered his ears with indie music, and turned to the black window. Then something blocked the dim light of the lamps for a few seconds, and a man sat down on the seat on the other side of the table. He looked at Ilya, who pulled out one earphone. "Hello." "Hi," said a hoarse, mocking voice. His face was in shadow, hard to see, but it seemed broad and oval. He was a stocky man, dressed casually. Ilya turned back to the window. All the lamps came on, and suddenly his reflection appeared in the black glass. He glanced around the car. People were exchanging smiles, mostly mature and elderly, but there were also children. There was a barely perceptible jolt, and the train began to move. Ilya glanced at his neighbor, but strangely enough, he couldn't make him out. He saw only a nearly transparent shadow, a thick, dark spot in the shape of a man. It was three-dimensional, and something was moving within it. "What's wrong, kid?" The man was back in the flesh. "What? I'm fine," Ilya said, embarrassed, quickly grabbed his phone, turned up the volume on the national in his headphones, and started scrolling through his playlist. He needed more sleep, that's all. He hadn't slept well for months. But tomorrow it would all be resolved, and sleep would probably return. Everything would return. The conductor appeared, collected everyone's tickets, tore off a sheet for herself, asked something about linens, then about tea. She didn't ask about Ilya's neighbor's ticket. Maybe he knew him, or he'd paid the conductors bypassing the ticket counter. Who knows? Ilya glanced toward the front of the car and saw another conductor standing there with his back to him. He was bald, and his head was shiny, looking somehow uneven. Maybe it was the lighting. Grimacing, Ilya returned to the playlist on his phone. Now the Smiths were playing. He stared out the window again, looking through himself into the darkness, his lips moving silently, repeating the lyrics. Love, peace, and harmony. Oh, very nice, very nice, very nice, very nice. But maybe in the next world. You are falling. Ilya didn't understand what had happened. The music had stopped. The phone screen didn't light up. And then there was that voice, as if coming from headphones. "Did you say something?" Ilya asked his neighbor. The man glanced at him and grinned. He shook his head. "Sergei Sanich," the man said, holding out his hand, a large, strong one. Ilya was a little shy in front of his fragile palms, so he shook the outstretched hand more firmly. "Ilya, will you have some tea with me? Well, it's kind of..." The sudden conversation was already unnerving him. "I don't even have a mug, and I don't really want one." Go ahead. It's on me. Your face looks really sour. You need something sweeter." Meanwhile, the phone refused to turn on. Nothing like this had ever happened before. The battery seemed to be full. How could anyone live in Moscow without a phone? True, Alice had never been late for the train station before. "Can we have 2 teas?" The neighbor turned to the conductor returning to the front of the car. "Green, black, sugar, lemon?" "Sweet, black. Well, let's have some lemon." The conductor left, and Sergei Sanich turned to Ilya, looking sympathetically at his attempts to revive the phone. "Is the machine broken? Probably a Chinese one." Damn, I'm helpless without a phone. I knew a man without arms, and he didn't have a phone. Ilya raised his head and looked at his neighbor. He was grinning, but it was unclear whether he was serious or not. He felt awkward. Ilya looked away and followed the conductor, then turned to the back of the car and saw the second conductor. This time, he was standing closer, but again with his back turned. He was short and plump, wearing a loose blue uniform with a gleaming hump on the back of his hairless head. It was odd. How had he managed to pass by? "You don't like chatty fellow travelers, do you?" Sergei Sanich continued. "Well, I'm just not very chatty myself." Ilya had to turn back to him. That's not true, is it? What do you mean? I mean, in the right company, you're probably a chatterbox yourself. The main thing is to have fewer people around, right? You don't know me, but I said it right? Well, with good friends, in the right company, that's what I'm saying. So what? Oh, nothing, kid. Relax. By the way, some tea. Sure enough, the conductor came over, placed a couple of glasses in dark, patterned cup holders on the table, and added packets of sugar. How fast? Ilya was surprised. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Sergei Sanich repeated, and the conductor left silently. Ilya tried to remember if his neighbor had paid for the tea. He didn't think so. A real VIP. Meanwhile, he emptied 2 packets of sugar into his glass and clanked his spoon. I love trains, don't you? He asked. Yes, I suppose so. All these cup holders, the short shelves, the sounds, the lights outside the window. There's such romance in it, such magic. People so close together. And it's not like on a plane or a tram. No, it's like a dormitory here, a big house without locked doors. It's not the same in a compartment, of course. You can't hide in a coffin here. People feel a connection. Even you, so unsociable, feel it. You feel it, right? Probably. Not probably, but definitely. And that feeling of the road, it's also magical. It seems like you're lying on your berth, texting some girl or reading a book. Sort of. But in reality, you're suspended somewhere between cities, between A and B. You seem to be moving, but you also seem to be standing still. Time seems to be passing, but maybe not. You're falling, especially when you're driving at night. You can feel it. Ilya dipped a tea bag in his glass. Something unpleasant prickled him at his companion's last words, but he didn't say anything about it. He said something else. Do you travel by train often? How can I say that? By your standards, it would be rare, but some would say I travel too often. And how do you know my measurements? Well, how old are you? 20, 2, 23, 28. He suddenly thought, for some reason, as if the man was deliberately making fun of Ilya's youthful appearance. It even felt offensive. Well, 28, and the last time I rode a train, you weren't even on the list. Wow. And you talk about all this train romance as if you travel all the time. Yeah, you know, time flies. It feels like it was only yesterday, the last time I rode like that. Sergei Sanich sipped his tea with his usual grin. Ilya followed suit, studying his companion's face. An incomprehensible fellow. He smiles so innocently. His eyes are brown like a dog's, and the wrinkles around them are so kind, yet sly. And you can't figure him out when he's serious, when he's joking. And somehow, Ilya liked all of this. There was something terribly familiar about it. They drank tea and talked more and more casually. Sergei Sanich asked Ilya about where he'd studied, why he'd dropped out, what his first girlfriend had been like, whether he'd written poetry, and so on. Sometimes these were strange questions, but answering them wasn't difficult, and such genuine interest was even pleasant. Sergei Sanich didn't ask about the future, though. Not about the purpose of his trip to Moscow. Not about his plans for life. Nothing. Maybe it's for the best. Yes, it's a shame things turned out this way with your friends. Well, I haven't had any friends for a long time either, and I haven't had a family either. You chat with someone on the road, and that's it. You move on, and they stay. Life is like that. His companion began philosophizing again, and Ilya was slightly distracted. It turned out that just a few steps away, the guides were whispering something. That ugly back of his head again. Horrible lumps like knees and elbows fused together without any sense of symmetry. And even closer to the side of his neck, a hideous reddish crease, like pursed, twisted lips. A scar, probably. That back of his head was starting to irritate Ilya. Did he even have a face? He should go to the restroom and take a look. Excuse me. Ilya rose from the table. It was nice to stretch, and his bladder was really starting to send out its signals. His hand was still clutching the handle of the cup holder. He wanted to take one last sip of tea before leaving, but the glass didn't budge even with his tug. With horror, Ilya noticed that the cup holder had melted right into the table, metallic webs spreading across the white wooden surface. The train car darkened. "You're falling," said an unfamiliar booming voice from the darkness. "Sorry." The light came on. For some reason, Ilya was clutching his glass to his chest. It was fine. The cup holder hadn't melted. Ilya sat up. "What's wrong?" Sergei Sanich asked him. I need to go to the restroom." He finished his tea and stood up again. Only for some reason he went to the back of the car instead of the front, as he'd intended. What was going on? Could such hallucinations really be caused by lack of sleep? Of course, he'd worn himself out over the past few months, but this was too much. Ignoring everyone, Ilya walked to the door with the window. Someone was standing there. An electronic sign hung above the door, reading "Restroom available." So at least there wasn't a line for that. Ilya turned the metal handle and walked in. A man was smoking by the lowered window. Their eyes met, and the uneasiness deepened. The man frowned, but his eyes, oily black and drunk, were expressionless. Ilya slid to the bathroom door, tugged the handle, panicked, then realized what had happened, and pushed the door inward. He went in and locked the door. After relieving himself, Ilya looked at himself in the mirror. He didn't look so stunned. His emotions were still hidden somewhere. Well, nothing had really happened. The light flickered, that was all. It would be good to get rid of Sergei Sanich as soon as possible. He might be a great guy, but he was too talkative. He needed to get to bed. By the way, what time is it? Without his phone and with all this chatter, Ilya had completely lost track of time. He left the bathroom. The smoking man hadn't left yet. True, now he looked sober and somehow cold. Those predatory, light grey eyes with their tiny pupils sent shivers down his spine. Ilya hurried on, through another door, faster along the rows of bunks. The lights in the car had been dimmed. Many had already settled down to sleep, and here and there, feet in black socks stuck out from the second berths. Out of the corner of his eye, Ilya saw a passenger quickly crawl out from under the bottom berth and, with spider-like dexterity, climb up, followed by another, but even higher, onto the luggage rack. Ilya walked on, and from the darkness of the luggage racks, disgruntled faces stared at him. Muffled squeaks could be heard. Someone grumbled. They were terribly cramped there. Where was berth 45? Ilya glanced around for numbers, but couldn't find them. Or if he did, he couldn't make out the numbers. Stopping was more terrifying. Arms and legs were wriggling everywhere, sticking out from under the blankets, short for now, but they could grow, tangle, and block the way. And there really was an obstacle ahead, the guide with his horrific nape. He didn't care if he had a face anymore. He just needed to slip past. but it wasn't working. The guide stood in the middle of the road with his back to him, only moving toward him, pressing forward, the bumps on the back of his head moving. A muffled moan could be heard through the skin, and then a scarlet scar on his side opened up. It was an eye. Oh God, why please? Something grabbed Ilya by the waist, then pushed him back into the seat. Across the table, a human silhouette was visible, a shadow. Something was moving and squirming inside her, translucent black tadpoles, and deep inside, in her ribcage, a web of blood vessels was visible, converging in the center into a lump, and it was pulsating. But it wasn't a heart, not quite a heart. It was a curled-up embryo, so old, so decrepit. "You're falling. Forgive me. This isn't death. You're falling. There's no bottom. The flesh is melting. You're falling. You're falling." The words, rolling and muffled, came straight from there, from the silhouette's chest. But gradually, the voice grew more ingratiating and quieter, and at some point, Ilya realized he could no longer see through the shadows. Sergei Sanich sat before him, frowning and pouring something from a small bottle into glasses. "Here, have some cognac, kid. You've completely lost it." The neighbor clinked the glass holder in front of Ilya. "I'm falling," he muttered hesitantly. "Come on, kid. Let's not faint. Want some cognac?" He picked up his glass and held it over the table. After a pause, Ilya followed suit. They clinked glasses and drank. "I'm going nuts. Excuse me," Ilya said. "Who isn't? This is the kind of life we live these days, and especially you young people. No rest for your brains." "Yeah, I just need to get more sleep," Ilya chuckled. "Or maybe I'm dreaming this whole thing. Oh, if only. This isn't a dream, kid, and it's not death." "What?" Ilya stared at his neighbor, his eyes wide. "It's nothing. All sorts of nonsense creeps into my head. You feel everything differently on the train." "That's right. You lose touch with reality." "Reality? No, that's all it is. The world, is big, enormous, like an endless cake, with many, many layers. And you crawl along your layer, not wanting to notice anything but that. And there's still so much good out there if you dig upward, and so much bad if you dig downward." At that moment, a hand slapped the window from the outside. Ilya jumped. With a resounding thud, another hand, both left, stuck to the glass next to one. "Forgive me." Sergei Sanich's voice seemed to recede into the distance. "It's because of me that you're seeing all this." "What do you mean? Are these hallucinations drugs?" Ilya realized he was choking and swallowed hard. "Am I poisoned?" Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement down the aisle to the right. Hands were crawling along the aisle, impossibly long and jointed, emerging from under the bunks in weak, awkward jerks, as if half paralyzed and sick. Pale, cold. Yes, they were definitely cold, hard, and terrifying. Someone grabbed Ilya's leg. "Quietly, don't look," said the embryo in Sergei Sanich's chest. "Why am I falling?" "We all fall, everyone on the train. You just see it, and others don't." "Why?" Ilya pleaded, shaking with disgust and horror. Hands were clutching his legs and climbing up his pants. "I'm sorry. Well, it was because I sat next to you and accidentally touched you. Who knew you were so sensitive? Come on, take it easy." Ilya realized no one was holding him. There were no hands. The car was asleep. Ilya let out a long breath, driving the trembling from his body. "Well done." Sergei Sanich pulled out another cognac. "And let's have another one. We'll strengthen it. I've never even smoked weed, I'm telling you, these aren't hallucinations. You just saw something you shouldn't have seen. Damn! Ilya jerked, noticing the conductor in the aisle ahead, the dim train light glinting on the back of his bald head, his scar covered. Better not look, his neighbor said without turning around. Let's have a drink. You've become like me now. I see it too, but I don't have to if I don't want to. The conductor stood there, at the front of the car, almost motionless. Only from time to time he twitched, as if tickled. Why is the train falling? Ilya asked, watching those barely noticeable but oh so nasty convulsions. Sergei Sanich sighed loudly. It's also because of me. I'm heavy. I sink, you know? And when I feel like I'm about to go completely nuts, I get on any train and go somewhere for the night. But here, as I'm telling you, there's a magic of its own, kid. People here are connected, and sometimes you can lean on them. It's like jumping on planks across a puddle. The main thing is to jump off in time. So everything will come back later? The planks float up after all. Well, a train isn't a plank. It will, how should I put it, waver back and forth. It will surface occasionally, but less and less often, at different times, and maybe even in different places. Like a ghost train? Well, yeah, that's how they appear, actually. So many legends. I've seen them near Balaclava, near Rastenburg. The Moscow metro has its own. Basically, they fly by here and there, and then there's just fog and nothing. Some people believe it, some don't. It's not so interesting when you know everything for sure, right? So what now? When will they wake up? They'll understand, right? They won't understand anything. Only you and I can understand everything. But they can't. They can't even get off the train. They're all tied up. But you and I can. Just before dawn, kid, we'll jump off somewhere. Understand? Ilya heard something rustling under his seat. He wanted to look, even though he couldn't. But it turned out his palms were stuck to the table. He felt a faint, gnawing pain in them, and thin, branching streams of blood ran across the table, like burst capillaries in an eye. The cup holder was melting again, settling, and thin streams of metal were running from it too. The patterns were intermingling. In the distance, the conductor twitched and moved awkwardly backward. "Why are you falling?" Ilya asked, looking down, staring at the intricate patterns of metal and blood. "What's so hard to understand? I've sinned a lot, but I don't want to die." "You're such a bitch." "Maybe," a booming voice said from the depths of the shadows. Ilya closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled. The rustling under the seat stopped, and everything was quiet. "So the train won't come to Moscow anymore?" Ilya asked, without raising his eyes. "Maybe it will, but certainly not when you need it. It's better not to wait for that. It's easy to get stuck here." Sergei Sanich paused. "Sorry, Ilyusha, but you'll never see Elisa again. You can't give her the books, and you certainly won't be able to mend your relationship. She might have died of old age. I really feel sorry for you, kid. I had a son, a long time ago. I thought I couldn't remember, but when I look at you, it's all over again." Ilya opened his eyes and peered into his neighbor's face. Yes, exactly. Sergei Sanich looked eerily like his father. That must be why he liked him. He didn't care anymore. He just wanted to sleep, that's all. They say you sleep well on the train. And Ilya would have said the same thing if someone had asked him. But in reality, he slept rather poorly on the train, waking up sometimes in the middle of the night. But even that was what he enjoyed, the thrill of his approaching destination. He loved trains, always had. "I'll take a nap," Ilya said, or perhaps only meant to say. He drifted off instantly, as if he'd fallen into darkness. He dreamed of some disturbing murk, feeling guilty and explaining to someone that his father had abandoned their family, that such things happen, it's no big deal. He also dreamed that the train stopped in the middle of the night, that terrible feeling of immobility in emptiness. Then Ilya woke up with his butt sliding off the seat. He sat up straight, his shoulders straightened until they creaked. Misty fields with scattered trees flashed past the window, and daylight was breaking. His left cheek burned. Ilya must have been pressing it against the wall. The seat next to him was, of course, empty. Ilya frowned, looking around the car. It seemed like everyone was still asleep. The motionless figures under the white sheets evoked associations with a morgue. But then, little by little, they began to stir. People rose, one after another, scurrying to the restroom with towels and toothbrushes. Someone was brewing coffee from tea bags. And somewhere, the squeaky melody of a children's toy began to play. The landscape outside the window changed. Suburban stations flashed by, and Ilya recognized graffiti on the walls of low Soviet-era buildings in the industrial zone. Then came apartment buildings, and out the window to the right, a dark, multi-story leviathan floated through the fog. The train passed other trains, their numbers growing. There was a bustle in the car, but Ilya remained seated. He didn't need to pack, just grab his bag and put on his jacket. He didn't even need to wrap himself in a scarf. Moscow seemed warm. Maybe he was still expecting a trick. And then he saw the Kazansky station building, the platform lined with taxi drivers, loaders, SIM card sellers, and those just waiting to greet him. He peered at the people, his chest twisting into a knot. And then he caught a glimpse of Elisa's short haircut in the crowd. She was walking behind the slowing train, scanning its carriage, as always, with her jacket unbuttoned and not even a hat, and her quick, springy gait was unmistakable. Ilya felt his heart begin to beat, cautiously again, faster and faster, until it fluttered like a tiny bird caught in a snare. Train 099 was passing by. Elisa couldn't keep up. It seemed to be picking up speed. The platform ended. The train plunged into darkness for a moment, and Ilya already knew what was happening behind him. The carriage was changing. Ilya realized he was leaning against the table and, afraid he'd stick again, pulled his hands away. The table was slanting upward, blue veins visible on its surface. A familiar muffled moan sounded in his ear. Someone was standing behind him. "You're falling," Ilya whispered, but it wasn't his voice, and it wasn't his lips moving. His gaze darted to the window again, and brick walls with graffiti flew past. He didn't try to decipher them. He knew what was written there. He knew his fate and couldn't even scream. And then everything became clouded over.